Hey everybody, this is Steve Reis from iRacing, and I've got the privilege here today to be with Anthony Burroughs at Clint Bowyer Racing, crew chief of the Don O'Neill's number 5 super late model. Thanks for joining us here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's, looking forward to it.
We're going to do a little tech talk. We polled our members to get some really interesting questions, and we pulled the best ones to go through here. So one of the first things people are interested in, I guess, is how much does a dirt late model cost? How much does it cost to put one of these together and take it out to the track?
That's just the car. I mean, that's no spare parts, anything. Just race ready car. I mean, you're looking probably 85 grand, 80, 90 grand. I mean, the motors now are 50,000 by themselves. So, so I'd say you got 90 grand to spend, you could have a competitive car.
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
So how many races are you guys looking to do a year?
Last year we ran 81. So we're always depending on rainouts and makeups and all that, but we're typically in the 70 to 80 range.
And what's it cost you to sort of unload the car to just run one of these races?
Well, it's, I mean, it varies from, like on the series, sometimes like you, if you have perfect attendance, you get free pit passes, this, that, and the other. But I mean, the average entry fee is $110 for a 12,000 to win show. But then the pit passes are $45 per person, and then you got wearing. You know, we figure a couple of dollars a lap on the motors, and then you throw in the wear and tear. I mean, it's pretty pricey.
It's pretty incredible that you run that many races and you get your crew out there for so long.
Yeah.
Do you guys have multiple chassis like you might have, you know, on a NASCAR team or something like that? Do you run multiple chassis?
No. We have each team here. We have 4 cars here, and both cars are all the cars are exactly the same. Now, of course, you get into your setups that varies from the bigger tracks to the smaller tracks, but as far as the chassis goes, it's they're identical.
And do you find your drivers running similar setups, or are they drastically different? Like, can you show up with the same setup?
You know, so, at some places we go, they're very, very similar. But then, like this past weekend at Eldora, they were 180 degree opposite of one another, and both guys were pretty competitive. So it's really a lot depending on the track, and their driving styles are a little different, and so you have to adjust accordingly to that.
And so what are some of your go-to adjustments, you know, through the event? Like, if you take me through an event starting with a wet tacky track and then progressing to the dry slick, what are you kind of looking to adjust on?
We adjust the stagger, of course. With our tire rules, that's limited now, but stagger's a big thing. Rear steer with bar angles, like you'll want to put more angle in the right side rods for early, and you want to get that back out for late. Your loads you'll run more load in the left rear early. Left front spring, you'll want to run this to get you in the corner early when it's tacky and fast. You'll take spring out, and then you'll start creeping that back in as you need to be tighter. And then we're constantly tuning on the shocks.
Right.
Depending on what the car's doing. Sometimes you just got to unload and go out there and make some laps and see if you got to figure out if you're tight. If he comes in and he says he's tight, are you traction tight or are you just tight from something else?
Right.
That's one of the biggest challenges we have is trying to determine where you're tight at, because that way you got to know if you're working are you tight on the back of the car, or is it because the front end's not turning real well?
Sure.
So that's one of the biggest challenges we have.
You know, something that I thought was interesting coming from more of a stock car background was how much camber you guys run on the right front at times.
Yes.
You know, sometimes it almost looks like the suspension is broken. You know, what sort of dynamic cambers are you guys shooting for these days?
You know, on the right front we're around 18 degrees.
Wow.
That's dynamic.
Yep.
And but it's crazy now. We're running massive cambers in the left front. Like now the left front tire is like this, tilted out. So because that really helps your corner entry.
Right.
And so
turning into the
corner. But yeah, the right front gets up to about 18 degrees.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. We were at one point about 22 degrees, but we were getting into some negative jacking, and we had to take some of it out.
You'll often hear guys talking about these cars being up on the bars or keeping the car on the bars, and you know, I guess I'm curious, are there some specific adjustments you guys are making, and is that the direction you like to take your setups?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly where we are now. Like, if the right front goes down, the left rear's coming up.
Yep.
And so we tune right there 100% of the time, because you want the car up in the air on the bars, because the more you want that spoiler as high in the air as you can get for downforce.
Yep.
and downforce creates grip.
And so you'll see guys trying to seal the nose and get the spoiler up all the time, and that's purely for aero. And I'm sure there are mechanical trade-offs that are associated with that.
It is, a little bit, but it's not, I mean, we've kind of got it now, so basically you start out with your right front higher and your left rear lower, and that allows you to raise your deck to go through tech. Well, then as soon as you roll out on the track, pick up the gas, the car pops up like that, and it stays there because of the compression and the shock, the load.
And so you guys, what is the deck height rule right now? And
it's 39 inches, and then they have a 15-inch nose rule on the right front. So the right front can't be any higher than 15 inches. So if it is, they push it down to 15 inches, and then they check your deck height, and it's got to be 39 inches.
Okay, and so you guys are kind of
both sides, and so we might, you know, but when we're out on the track, that thing's probably 50.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
One thing guys were wondering about is how the driver's approach kind of changes to the corner, if he's trying to run the top, run around the cushion, or trying to, you know, kind of creep around the bottom when the track is all slick through the middle. Is there big differences in how the drivers approach the corner? Or?
I mean, the biggest thing is they try to run as straight as they can without getting crooked. We used to think getting it all sideways and the left front in the air was the way to go, but now the key is running the corner as straight as possible. So it definitely makes a difference. If you're running the top, you've got to enter more with your right front to stay straight, to drive right around the cushion. But and then the bottom, you can just kind of turn in and get bent a little bit. So I mean, it is a little bit different approach to your corner entry depending on where you're running. One
thing we've got in the model is like a disconnect on the right front brake. Is that something you guys are playing with a lot, or?
The guys will, if they're complaining and unhappy about the car's handling, they'll use that as an exaggerated illustration that I had to use right front. I had to turn my right front brake on. They feel like if the car's good, you're always on 3-wheel brakes.
Okay.
So the only time we ever go to 4-wheel brakes is if they're way loose.
Which I'm guessing isn't common, because I hear mostly you're just tight into the corners in a late model.
Yeah, for the most part. We fight tight, but there is occasions that we can get loose in if we get too much, if we miss our loads, and but for the most part, tight is a big deal.
And so I guess that's why sometimes you'll see the rear brakes rotors glowing and sparking.
Yep,
and
that's exactly right.
Just running.
And then a lot of guys they ride the brake pedal all the way around the track, and that also helps keep the car up on the bars.
Yeah.
So when the guys that's doing that, they are sparking and glowing.
Can you explain how you tune on the cars using the J-bar? What's it for and how it works?
The J-bar is our friend as far as side bite goes. Starting out early in the night, we'll go down on the frame. We'll take rake out of it. We'll be down on the frame and up on the pinion. We'll be 1 inch up on the pinion. That's the most we ever go, which is center. And as the night goes on, we'll start creeping it back. We'll start going down on the pinion, up on the frame, and it just basically controls side bite, and of course the rear end side to side.
Right.
But that's something we adjust throughout the night.
And is it, I guess something else back there that I'm curious about is how you guys work at axle lead. Is that something?
Yes, that's. And that's something, the more rear steer, the more hike we've gotten in the car has created a lot more roll steer.
Yep.
And so to kind of combat that, we've started, you get pretty aggressive with your wheelbase as much as the rules allow.
Right.
And so it's very common to lengthen your left side wheelbase. We used to just shorten the right side. But if it's slick and you're needing grip and you need to lead the corner straighter, then we'll typically run that left side back some, and vice versa. If you're somewhere where it's wide open, say Eldora this weekend, the left rear will be standard and you'll be pushing the right rear back.
Sure. Could you give me kind of the suspension back there? I think can be kind of intimidating to someone who's never seen rear suspension on a dirt late model, and the 4-bar and the bird cages and whatnot. Could you give a brief overview of how that functions?
Yeah, it's basically, I mean, you got your 4 bars, they're attached to the bird cage, and then they run forward to the frame, and the indexing of those bird cages is very, very critical to your rear steer and your loads. So basically, as you've got your spring and shock behind the axle tube. So when the car rolls up on the left rear, then you're basically loading into the spring, and and it does the same thing on the right rear. So the more the angle of the bars, the more indexing of the bird cage, which you're trying to push the tires in the ground.
Right.
And then the placement on the chassis affects the roll steer, the placement on the bird cages. It's all about rear steer and roll steer back there. And so you move those bars around and you clock those bird cages around to get the optimum that you're looking for.
That you're chasing after, yeah. Another question we'd had is with fuel load in the car, is that something you guys monitor closely through an event, or are you setting different fuel loads for qualifying, different fuel loads for different track types? Like, do you tune balance with that at all?
We try not to. We used to think loading up with fuel is a good thing, but it's not really a good thing at all. So now we run as minimal amount of fuel as we possibly can to get away with. So when we scale here, we scale with 15 gallons of fuel. So when we hot lap, qualify, heat race, it's 15 gallons of fuel is what we start with. Now, depending on the length of the race, then and we know we typically burn 7 gallons of gas in a 50 lap feature.
Sure.
So we know we got to be up there around 20, 21 gallons. Now the 100 lap races at the big tracks, you got to fill all the way up, and that creates a balance problem.
Right.
And because you've got to come up here and do something, because now you're basically taking a bunch of load out of your front tires and put it on the back, which creates a massive shove.
Yep.
And so typically on a deal like that, you've got to raise the rear ride heights up, and then you've got to add some ballast up here to the front to try to get it all equaled back out.
And then are you still working within the same kind of minimum weight rule when you're doing that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, like, typically we get a pound per lap burn off, so the weight's not a big deal unless you're at Eldor and they don't give you that. But it's you're just trying to. It's all about, you've got to move the weight around to keep your percentages where you want them. And so 50, if you fill up with fuel, if you scale when you got 54 and a half or 53 and a half, you've basically put 2% more of rear in there. So now you want to get that back out. So you're trying to move something forward, and then you're trying to, so that's 70 pounds. So you have to pick the back of the car up to try to put some of that weight back up there on the front tires.
I guess speaking of weights, on the weight topic, is there you'll hear people talk about left rear bite, and then I still think you hear people talk about cross weight. Is there, I guess maybe explain how those two numbers are related and which one you guys typically rely on?
We use left rear bite, but left rear bite and cross weight is the same thing. I mean, the higher the wedge, the left rear wedge you have in the car, the higher the cross weight number is going to be. So they work hand in hand, but it seems like the dirt guys use more of left rear bite or wedge, where like the more in the asphalt guys, they use cross weight.
And is there some typical, like, does that value change drastically from a short track to
Not
a
really.
bigger track? No?
Not really, because we really don't even look at that anymore, because it's we look at loads.
Right.
And we're running the way the car is in dynamic. It's really, you don't have any wedge in it, because it's all the right front's down, the left rear's up. It's kind of all the wedge is gone, and you're running strictly off of your rods.
Give us a little bit of discussion on what sort of spring rate ranges you guys are running.
The standard, our standard package is just a 500, 325 in the front. Left front's 500, right front's 325. Left rear's 200, right rear's 250. That's just a standard conventional spring. If you get lost and you're just not running good, you can always go back to that. For our cars, go back to those 4 springs, and it'll get you back going.
Will you do that? Will you go back and run
sometimes?
Springs? Yeah.
If we're having a bad night and it just seems like we can't get going, we'll go back, and if that doesn't pick us up, we'll know we've got something wrong somewhere else, because that's just kind of a go-to deal for us.
I gotcha. Is there anything you guys do to try to control the left front? Is that something you worry about? Do you try and keep it down? Or?
We want it down as much as possible. So, if we're somewhere where it's a big sweeping corner fast track, we'll put some lead up on the left front, and we can take some turns out of the left front to just try to keep the left front on the ground. Because the better the left front's on the ground, the better you're going to steer in the corner.
So when you guys finish up a race, what's the process you take? And the night's over, you guys are out on the road. How do you go and prepare for the next upcoming event?
If we're out on the road and we race, let's say we race tonight and we're going to race again tomorrow, we get to the next track as soon as we can, and we unload. We pretty much pull all the shocks and springs off, re-dyno all the shocks, reset everything back in your spring smasher to standard, nut and bolt the car, pretty much try to put a wrench on every bolt, just clean your heims, recheck your fuel, check your Oberg as far as your engine goes. Just do as much maintenance as you possibly. You can't do as much maintenance on the road as you do here,
sure.
but you do as much as you possibly can. And the guys will get the tires ready. I mean, that's a whole nother process in
sure.
itself. And when we're home, then we unload, we wash thoroughly. I mean, we wash out on the road, but not with a pressure washer.
Right.
But we'll wash, get everything cleaned up, get the body off, get it straightened up or replaced, and pretty much try to take every moving part off of the car, clean it, make sure nothing's bound up, put it all back together, and then we run the motor, run the valves, and then we bring it to scale, and we scale it, check the front end, check the toe, and it goes back in the truck.
Now, when you're on the road, do you guys have provisions for some major damage repair and wreck, you know?
Yeah, we have spare parts in the trailer pretty much to build a car. So we have spare rear end, spare motor, spare suspension parts. So anything that we break, we can fix. Right there on the spot. So,
chassis?
But we just have to unload the other car.
I gotcha.
The only thing we don't have a third of is the chassis.
Okay.
So we have 2 complete cars and then enough parts to do another car.
So in the sim right now, we have a wide variety of tracks. We've got Eldora, we've got Lima Land, we've got Williams Grove, Volusia, you know, and going from some of those bigger tracks down to some of those smaller tracks, you know, what are the things you guys really pay attention to?
The speed, the banking. Eldora, like you got to drive around there turning left all the time, so you've got to set the car up so it's for sure going to turn on entry, because those guys are driving in there wide open on the gas, and if it pushes, they're going to knock the fence down.
Right.
And so you, whatever you got, you know that's going to help that car turn and stay in the ground, then that's what we have to do. Then we go somewhere like Macon, Illinois, which is very, very small.
Right.
Then you're just looking for traction. It may not turn real good, and they may have to turn it some with the brake pedal and the gas at the same time, but they just got to have traction because it's so small.
And what's the size of Macon? I think it's a 6th mile or something?
Maybe like at Eldora, we had a 535 gear. At Macon, you run a 730. I mean, it's a big difference.
Yeah. So you've obviously worked on these cars for a long time. You know, what are some of the most difficult challenges you come upon on a kind of a weekly basis? You know, what are the challenges associated with crew chiefing?
You know, the biggest thing we have to do now is the technology is changing so much in the engineering. You've got to, if you can get behind really, really fast. So you have to stay caught up with that and make sure you've got everything right. If you're off a little bit, it looks like you're off a mile.
Yep.
And so it's you just can't. You got to pay attention to every detail. There's not a detail that's not important. Okay, I got a question for you.
Sure.
When you guys originally scanned the car, and then you carried it back, what did you do to make it better and to take it, because it looks just like these cars sitting here in the shop.
Yeah.
And so what did that entail?
So yeah, it was a very unique car for us, and I think, you know, myself for sure coming into it, I'd never worked on any car like this, and I think the biggest challenge at the outset was to try and get the rear suspension and the 4-link modeled in such a way that it would behave correctly, and you could get up and on and off the bars and have it react in a believable way for not only the driver but also in replay view. And we just gathered a lot of data on the weight distribution in the cars, the setup packages that are run, the various, you know, front end models, how much camber you should be gaining, what sort of caster settings you're running, what your damper curves are looking like, you know, and trying to gather all of this information to make a very, I guess, just sort of unique car behave properly. The aero was another thing that we were fortunate to be able to gather a bit of wind tunnel data to at least give us, you know, we spoke that it's maybe not always possible, but to give us a guideline in terms of aero balance, and I think also having an accurate engine dyno data and all the kind of fundamental things that you need to kind of get the car reacting right. It was very unique in just how it needs to kind of skirt along the racetrack, and you need to have the the valence pinned without kind of bottoming out, and
Right.
that was something we struggled with, and I think we've made really great gains on even over the past 6 months, where we've just continued to work on this car, because it's personally a car that I have very much so enjoyed working on and developing, and I think it just continues to get better as we continue to work the model and the track surface and the tire model and everything. So I'm excited for just where it is now and where it's going to go, because it's a lot of fun, and with our current World Championship Series and whatnot, I think it's really starting to take off.
All right, now that I've given you all this top secret information,
Sure.
How are you going to take this and apply it to the sim?
Yeah, so this has been a very, very enlightening conversation for me just in general. So I'll try and thankfully we have it all on tape and kind of go back and, listen back and kind of pay attention to some of the things you said that I thought were interesting in terms of how the car behaves in the sim. Some things you said, I can relate to, just in terms of how it might push if you get off the gas and it falls off the bars and things like that. But just trying to get those nuances correct that people are really looking for, and get the motion in the car and things like that. So I really appreciate you spending all the time with us and all the very detailed explanations.
Hopefully it helps.
And I hope that really helps you guys out. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Thanks a bunch.
Bud. Thank you.